Hey, book lovers. My name is Em, and I want to talk about books. And cats. Hey, book lovers, welcome back. So there's a lot of excitement in Books and Cats land this week. I am getting a studio space. Andy and I are setting up a studio for our media company. It's super exciting. I have been recording this podcast for 2.5 seasons out of my closet, which is fine. I turned it into a nice little booth, but I'm excited to have space, and I'm excited for Frapp Media to have a home, and I'm excited to have a place to go record just whenever I want to. I think that's going to mean a lot more content for you guys. More books and cats and who knows what else. Also, just having a place to go and be able to separate work from home is going to be so nice. That is definitely one of the hardest things about working at home, is trying to create two separate things in one place, work and home. It doesn't help that I also have all my work stuff in my bedroom, which they say not to do. So it's going to be nice when home can just be home and be relaxing and fun and family, and I can have a place to go work. I'm so excited. So with all that said, we are moving into our space this weekend. Yay. And I am going to be taking next week off to get settled into the new space. Just from the regular episode, there will still be a new chapter of Storytime with Em on Sundays. I'm just so excited. Yay! Okay, so I also have a confession to make, book lovers. I failed. Big time. I failed at my goal of not buying books in the month of March. Now, I kind of failed this right when I said it, but then I kind of started it a week into March. But since then, I have bought extra Audible credits, and then I saw a post from an author friend about this series that she was reading, and I ended up getting the first 2 books on my Kindle, because the third one's not out yet. And then I ended up buying another couple Kindle books because I was on there, and then I also bought a paperback. Whoops. I'm going to try again in April. I think I definitely have plenty of reading options, and I need to give it a rest and read what I've got. Anyway, let's talk about this week's book. This one was another audiobook, and it was suggested to me by Andy. He just listened to it and really enjoyed it. And I had heard of it before, so I thought I'd give it a try. It's science fiction, which is a bit of a change for me, and I have been trying to branch out this year. So this week I want to talk about Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. So sci-fi is always a little conflicting for me. I like wild, out-of-this-world concepts, but sometimes I feel like they spend almost too much time on like procedure and making things seem realistic or like possible. And I'm sure that there are a bunch of people who read sci-fi and really need it to be believable, and I don't know. I write about magic, so my mind is open to accept pretty much anything. So I just need less proof, I guess. I don't know. It just was slow in places. I feel like I would have had a better time with this book if I had read the physical book instead of listening to the audiobook. I sometimes have a problem with this with fiction audiobooks. It gets a little slow, and then I get impatient. If they really start to belabor a certain point, and it's something that if I was reading it, I could just kind of skim it, I get impatient. I will say the idea for this book was pretty cool. Our main character, Jason, is a science professor, and he's married to the woman of his dreams. They have a 14-year-old son, and Jason is incredibly happy, but he does sometimes wonder, what if, He had been a scientist working on a major breakthrough, but he ended up giving it up when his brilliant artist girlfriend at the time told him that she was pregnant. They both kind of give up their dreams, but they have this wonderful family life. So he goes out to celebrate his old college friend's newest prize, something that Jason could have won in another reality. And that's kind of the basis of this book. On his way home from the bar, Jason is attacked. He's injected with something, and he wakes up in a lab surrounded by scientists. Now, they all seem to know him, and they know his name, but they know Jason as a famous prize-winning scientist who has achieved something just incredible, something that was thought to be impossible. Of course, Jason has no idea what is going on, and he escapes from the lab, only to find that his house is different, and he lives alone. He tracks down Daniela, who is his wife, and he finds that she is unmarried and a successful artist. And their son does not exist. So Jason's big discovery is a box, which, with the aid of a special drug compound, makes it possible to access the multiverse. A hallway with an infinite amount of doors, which are all happening simultaneously. They're all at that same point in time in Chicago, but just in an infinite amount of worlds, different paths that Jason took from the moment that he learned about Daniela's pregnancy. Are you still with me? Because honestly, I barely am with myself right now. That's pretty much the best I can do to describe the plot without giving things away and without making it any more convoluted. I don't know. I get why it gets too wordy in some parts, because it has to be incredibly complicated to be able to describe everything in such a way that is both believable but also still understandable. So yeah, I think it's okay if it gets a little wordy. I just need to not listen to fiction audiobooks. This book definitely made me think. There were some really cool concepts, and I like the different worlds that are in it. It's a really cool idea overall. I do feel like he almost could have skipped the last ramp up, for even more drama, but I guess the book would be kind of short at that point. I think I was just kind of a bit impatient with this section because I kept being like, this is so unnecessary. And I know that's vague, but I don't want to ruin anything, and I would have to explain the entire plot to even get into detail about what I'm trying to say. It's a lot. I will say the final ramp up does help get to the end. I don't know. I had really strangely mixed feelings about this book, but overall, it's a good book. I was entertained. It's just not 100% my cup of tea, I don't know. I would definitely recommend Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. It's a very interesting story. I would just say that if you get impatient with things like that, just get the physical book. Although if you like audiobooks, the guy reads it really well. It's very well done. All right, so now it is time for a quick break. And then I've got another Smoky Christmas update and another chapter of my weekly writing project. Good stuff. Hey, book lovers. Do you have a podcast, a YouTube channel, TikTok? If yes, or if you'd like to get started, Frapp Media can help. We offer voice and video recording and editing, general book editing, and assistance with creating your own book, ebook, or audiobook, as well as instructional design if you, for some reason, need a course designed. And this is all at an affordable rate so your dreams can actually be accessible. We'd love to help you make your project its absolute best. Check out frappmedia.com. That's FRAPPMEDIA.com. Welcome back, book lovers. All right, another Smokey update. This is a good one. So Smokey had his first vet trip last week. He did a really good job. I was very surprised, honestly. The only time that he panicked was when we were outside. He didn't panic in the car. He didn't panic when we were at the vet. He only panicked when we were outside. And I just felt so bad for him. He must have had a really, really rough time before he got to us. Because he wants nothing to do with the outdoors. He's a lot younger than we thought. He's only about 2 years old, and he's in perfect health. It's so awesome. We're going to have Mr. Smoky Christmas for a very long time. And he is such a little love. He is by far the snuggliest cat we have, and he's one of the 2 lap cats that are in the house. 2 of them just like to sit next to you. They won't even sit on you. Smokey is almost aggressively lovey. He's just so sweet. When he showed up at our house, he was so skinny and matted, and he had no fur on his throat at all. And he kind of looked like a maniac. Like he looked like a wild animal. But it turns out we have gained one of the sweetest cats that I have ever seen. The vet said he's lucky, and I think we are too. He's a nice addition. All right. So now it is time for the quote of the week, and I've got a couple quotes from Dark Matter. The first one is, "Until everything topples, we have no idea what we actually have. How precariously and perfectly it all hangs together." And I can definitely agree with that one. And then the second quote is, "If you strip away all the trappings of personality and lifestyle, what are the core components that make me, me?" I don't know, there's a couple things to think about. I just realized how heavy this quote section is. Sorry about that. It was a heavy book. So it is time for a new chapter of my weekly writing project, Secret Keeper. And we are up to chapter 22 and still going strong. Can you believe it? I'm really enjoying this story. Anyway, this week is chapter 22. Enjoy. Kevo paced his room, back and forth, back and forth. He walked the small space until morning came. The only change was a brightening of the lights in his room. His windowless cell seemed to shrink as he paced, and he kept his head down, eyes turned to the floor. He counted his endless steps and tried to ignore the walls closing in around him. The sound of the door grinding open froze him in his tracks. He moved swiftly to the wall near the growing opening and pressed himself flat against it. He held his breath and waited, but no one entered the room. The door stood open, and Kevo sensed a person standing just on the other side, waiting, like him. Finally, he heard Lizalt sigh heavily. "Kevo," he said softly, "what are you thinking? I wouldn't try it, my friend. You won't get very far." A flash of white-hot rage made Kevo's blood boil. He leapt into the open, ready to do battle, and was swiftly knocked to the floor with one sweeping kick from Lizalt. His head hit the floor hard, and he lay there, breathing heavy, as the rage left him as quickly as it came. Lizalt hovered over him. He looked annoyed, but also worried. It made Kevo uncomfortable. "What's wrong with you?" His voice was soft. Concern furrowed his normally smooth features. "You're acting crazy." Kevo fought down another surge of rage. He tried to take slow, measured breaths. He couldn't just plow his way out of this situation. Lizalt was his match, if not his superior, in physical strength and swiftness. And his old friend had the benefit of also having wings. He would need to be smart about this. He would need to stay calm. "I'm sorry," he said finally. His voice broke a little as he spoke, and it had the effect he wanted. Lizalt's face was full of sympathy for his friend. "I didn't sleep much last night. I don't sleep much anymore. I have nightmares." Lizalt nodded slightly and swooped down to help Kevo to his feet. "I understand. I've had them too." The two men stood appraising each other. Kevo hadn't been lying. His nights had been haunted for years, and he barely slept anymore. It was probably affecting his sanity, but there was nothing left to try. He'd done it all. Some things brought a small amount of relief. He could sometimes steal a few hours or even a whole night of real rest. But it was never enough. It often seemed to make things worse. It woke up his body's craving for sleep, when he could usually keep it pushed down and silenced. Lizalt looked grim. Kevo worried his brother had developed mind-reading skills, but then the slight man sighed and flew out of the room. Kevo waited. Lizalt popped his head back in. "Are you coming or what?" He disappeared again, and Kevo hurried after him. The guard still hovered along the wall, and he met the cold, empty gaze of the one he'd encountered the night before. It sent a chill through him, and he quickened his pace after his floating friend. Lizalt zipped quickly down the halls, each green and identical. Kevo was soon turned around and lost. Several times he was convinced they'd doubled back and passed through the same hallways again and again. His feet ached, and he felt like he'd been walking for ages, sometimes climbing, sometimes descending briefly. It seemed impossible to have walked for as long as they had and still remain in the tree palace. They finally came to a stop at a dead end. A pale green glittering wall faced them, and there was nowhere left to go. Lizolt paused before the shimmery wall, but he didn't turn to face Kevo. He hovered silently for a long moment, gathering strength. Then he turned to face his old friend. He forced a smile. It looked unnatural and strange. Kevo was unnerved by the way it stretched across his friend's normally placid face. Something was wrong. The leaves of the wall began to tremble. They began to dissolve, and a bright light shone through the growing holes. Soon a grand doorway filled with green gold light stood before them. Lizolt was still smiling that weird, forced smile. He gestured to the opening. "After you, my brother." Kevo didn't want to step into that blinding light. Its strange shifting hue was nauseating, and he felt repelled. He wanted to run. He glanced over his shoulder, but there was no escape there. A silent mass of green and gold-clad flybits had collected in the hall behind him. They formed a solid wall of solemn faces and sharp, glittering weapons. Lizolt dipped a little. A momentary look of irritation passed over his features before the smile returned. He repeated his gesture toward the door. "After you, my brother," he repeated slowly. Kevo didn't like the glint in his friend's eyes. He didn't recognize him. They had grown too far in different directions. His dear old friend was a stranger now, and Kevo didn't trust him. He hesitated a moment longer, but the wall of flybits was closer now. He finally forced his body to move forward. His brain was screaming in resistance, but he turned it off. He went numb. The sound of rushing wind drowned out everything else as he stepped into the shifting and disorienting light. The light wrapped around him and warmed him beyond the point of comfort. The rushing wind sound was filled with screams. They pierced him, and he clapped his hands over his ears. It didn't help. It didn't even dull the screaming. He felt his feet leave the ground, and he was swept away. He was tossed around by unseen, ghostly hands. His body flipped and spun through the air. All the while, the light continued to burn his eyes and blur his vision. A sudden rush of cold air sideswiped him, and Kevo felt like he was falling sideways. He had lost all sense of direction, but somehow he knew this was sideways. He was knocked out of the burning light and the screaming winds, and fell with a painful, jarring bump onto a shiny black stone floor. The floor under him was pleasantly cool and soothing. Kevo lay there trying to catch his breath and assess his body for damage. He was bumped and bruised, but otherwise okay. The green gold light was an ever-moving wall next to him in the empty cavern. With a sudden whoosh, the wall flew up to the impossibly high ceiling and dissipated into the darkness there. Kevo struggled to sit up. It hurt, but it wasn't anything he couldn't handle. He had endured much worse over the years. Mostly he was curious about this new place. He was obviously not in the Western Forest anymore. Lizolt had sold him out. There was no doubt in his mind anymore. This was not about keeping Kevo safe. It was only ever about Lizolt and his schemes. Kevo wished he had just ignored Nim's call. Part of him had wanted to. He could have remained in his gym and taught martial arts classes. He could continue to serve his community and teach them how to take care of themselves. He got a lot of satisfaction from his life. Yet he still came running as soon as Nim called. He'd been waiting a very long time for that call. There had been so many hopeless nights where he gave up and knew for certain that it would never come. Every morning, though, his hope returned. And she had called. Finally. And he'd failed her. He didn't make it to her, and she had no idea he had tried. She would think he had abandoned her. A snort of laughter sent him spinning around. The woman standing before him was familiar, but he couldn't quite place her. If he knew her, it had been a very, very long time ago. She smirked and moved across the room toward him with her hand outstretched. "I didn't expect you to recognize me," she said kindly. "We've only met briefly, and it was a long time ago during a rather stressful time." He squinted and took her hand. It still wasn't clicking. He thought he remembered her face, but he was certain of nothing else. The woman squeezed his hand and placed her other delicate one over his. Her touch was cool and light, but he shivered a little. "Are you cold?" she asked. Her eyes were large in the dim light. "Come over here and sit by the fire." Kevo noticed the hearth for the first time, and he was soon seated on a plush sofa close to the flames and sweating. The woman sat beside him and stroked his arm with her fingertips. Her touch chilled him every time, and despite the heat and the sweat, he felt a chill settle deep in his bones. It planted a kernel of ice in his heart. "If I tell you my name," she said finally, "I fear you will turn against me. I am rather infamous. But then again, so are you. History has not been kind to any who touch the peace tree." Kevo jerked his arm away and stared at the woman. He studied her features and tried to remember. That time was hazy in his memory, and he normally liked to keep it that way. There was nothing good there waiting for him in the haze. Even the best memories had a bitterness to them. Everything ended, good and bad. "Francie," she said impatiently. "I'm Francie." "Mina's kid," Kevo said without thinking. Francie grimaced at the mention of her mother. "I have never been a kid," she said shortly. "My mother made sure of that. I don't think we need to be defined by our mother's choices, do you?" She raised an eyebrow and gave him a challenging look. Kevo lifted his chin, his chest puffed out just a bit, and he nodded. "True," he laughed. "I definitely don't. Though I believe many have already judged us by that very criteria." Francie grew solemn, and Kevo cut his laughter short. "I'm afraid I don't find that quite as funny as you do," Francie said slowly. "Some people can be incredibly cruel. That's why I went into hiding. I couldn't stand being around people." Kevo remembered hearing she had vanished. Many believed she was dead, though the children of death were cursed with almost eternal life. There had been certain groups who were looking for her. They were very unhappy with her disappearance. She was indebted to them and far from done paying them off. But those people were long dead. Many didn't last long after Francie's disappearance. One by one, they experienced strange accidents or unexplained illnesses. Many believed Francie had cursed them. Others believed she was hiding somewhere and slowly getting her revenge. Kevo wouldn't doubt either one. This woman was far from the mighty power she was rumored to be. She had been one of the strongest of her cousins, but the rumors grew to mythical proportions during her long absence. Sitting beside her, Kevo dwarfed the slender woman. Her hands and features were small and delicate. He knew the tales, but he just couldn't make them fit with the tiny woman nestled among the pillows, with the firelight dancing on her face. "Kevo," she said suddenly, grabbing his hand in both of her tiny ones. "I need your help. Please. Something very bad is coming. It's already here, really. You can see it. I know you can." Kevo nodded. She was squeezing his hand so tightly, and her nails cut into his palm. "I've seen it coming for ages. Long before I went into hiding, I began suspecting it. I've been studying this whole time. I think I know how to stop it, but I can't do it alone. I need you. Please." Her eyes were enormous in the firelight, and her grip was even tighter. The pain in his palm was becoming almost unbearable, but Kevo refused to flinch. Now was not a time for weakness. He nodded. "I'm in." Francie grinned and threw her arms around him. "I knew I could count on you. Nim knew. That's why she called you. Sorry to interrupt that, by the way, but you'll see her soon enough." Kevo sat up. His heart raced. Francie grinned. "I thought that might interest you. That's why I need your help. Almost everyone else hates us. You actually care. Now," she said as she got to her feet and began pacing the small space in front of the fire, "I think I can stop what's coming, and trust me, we need to stop what's coming. I can't do it alone. I need my cousins. Unfortunately, the other side has been very busy, and we're a bit behind. We need to hurry if we're going to save them in time." "Save them?" Kevo spoke slowly. His thoughts were floaty and vague, and he had drifted off while Francie was talking. All he could think about was seeing Nim again. Francie rolled her eyes. You'll see her soon enough. You're going to save Nim and be her hero. If that's enough to motivate you, fine. Let's get moving. We ran out of time, like yesterday. Francie slapped his shoulder, and a jolt of electricity shot through him, igniting every cell in his body. His injuries were healed, and he felt even stronger than usual. He flexed his biceps and watched the fabric of his shirt strain against the muscle until it ripped. His body seemed to be growing, and soon Francie was the size of a flybit beside him. He scooped her up, and she gestured toward a large door, which slid open smoothly without a sound. Kevo ducked through the doorway and followed Francie's directions down the twisting hall. And that is the end of Chapter 2, book lovers. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the podcast. If you haven't yet, please give the show a like or subscribe or whatever you can do wherever you listen. It definitely all helps a ton. And if you know someone who loves books and cats, send them this way. The more book lovers, the better. Remember, on Sunday is a new episode of Storytime with M, with a new chapter of my book, The Last Witch. You can find all of my books, plays, and stories at frappmedia.com, booksandcatspod.com, and on Amazon and Audible. All over the place. And like I said earlier, if you are looking for recording or video work, you can contact us through frappmedia.com. We have very reasonable rates. And speaking of Frapp Media, we are moving into our studio space this weekend, so I am taking next week off. The next time you hear me on a regular episode, it will be from my new studio space. I'm so excited. So no new episode next week. However, Storytime will continue uninterrupted. Thank you so much for your support, book lovers. I appreciate you all so, so much. I hope you have a beautiful week. Snuggle with your furry friends, get into a good book, and until next time, keep reading.
A Frapp Media production.